Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Coroner. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, at the beginning, we kind of see, the ramifications of Jenny's actions last episode, kind of opening all of Peterson's cases. Obviously, Donovan kind of being a little shitty towards her, because he's like, oh yeah, here's this bucket of bones, and she's like, yeah, these are pig bones. He's like, well, that's kind of up to you to determine whether, they really are, because these bones were found in somebody's yard or whatever, and she's like, yeah, if you're trying to basically be pissy with me about this whole situation, she's like, I'm basically getting enough flack from other people, because at first they were having such a cordial conversation, almost so it's like, oh, I guess he's okay with her, oh, this is him being a little passive aggressive about the whole thing. But obviously it's just like, obviously she's getting all these different phone calls, and obviously it's stressing her out. I love the whole situation with Allison, saying like, okay, you have your pill situation, which I guess like Jenny was almost caught off guard by it, but she didn't go too far into it, because for Allison, she's like, her thing is baking, and it's like, she's like, well, it gives her focus, because the precise ingredients and stuff like that. Plus afterwards you have pie to eat, which I think this episode showcases kind of like, Allison's kind of being very bubbly, and very bright personality, which I think is kind of interesting. And I think it's a nice contrast. Kind of Jenny's kind of obviously going through some stuff on her own. But regardless, the fact that, because obviously she's stressed out, so it's like, hey, come over for Thanksgiving dinner. Then it's like, obviously like Ross is spending time with his grandfather. What I thought was really interesting is like when Jenny went to meet with Liam, and he was like, whoa, that trap, it's like, and she's like, oh, is this, and he's like, oh yeah, all it's going to do is make some noise. I was immediately like, it's not going to make, like, if it was just going to make noise, why would it be that big of a deal if she stabs someone? Like, I figure it's going to be like some, like, not necessarily Indiana Jones level traps, but it's going to be like some, wooded spikes are going to come down and stab somebody type of trap. That's why I just felt like, because he made sure to even step over himself, not just like accidentally activate it. That, or maybe it's just like, I'd rather not go through the trouble of setting it up again. But my immediate thought was like, oh, that's a more heavy trap than he's letting on. But I think he just didn't want to freak her out, so he made just like, I know, it's just going to make some noise for bears. Because immediately my brain was like, probably after last episode, and he even talks about he doesn't like being caught off surprise in his own home, and that was near his house when everything went down last episode. So it's everything, Dylan attacking Ross, about to attack Ross and everything. So I think that kind of triggered something in him, like, I'm never going to be caught off guard again. Like, I think it kind of kicked in his military instinct. So it's kind of like, no, I'm never, because being caught off guard, in that line of work and everything, I mean, it's life or death type of thing. So I think, like, for him, it's like, I got a little too lax, and just those instincts kicked in again. And that's what I take from it. But obviously, it's like, this whole Thanksgiving dinner is kind of interesting, because it's like, oh, Allison's over, Sabina's over, because she just broken up with her significant other, and she's over, which immediately my brain was kind of like, is Allison and Sabina kind of like, is there something there? Like, it seemed like maybe I was reading too much into it. I felt like I was catching some like flirtatious vibes and stuff like that, because she's like, I bowed out to a woman who knows exactly what she wants, and I was like, oh, is there something, and, offering to take her home. I mean, that could just be like, oh yeah, no, I'm but a part of me is like, is there more to that? Maybe not, who knows? And obviously, like, things are complicated, too, because, like, Jenny enjoys being around Liam, but it's like, what are we? Because she described Liam as her handyman, and he's like, oh, I've been, because it's like, oh, yeah, like, this smokehouse or smoke show, it's like, oh, I've been called worse, like, handyman, and it's like, she's like, I didn't know if I really wanted to, should I go and describe you as, like, my boyfriend? And he's like, why? Is that what we are? And she's like, for her, it's like, her life is complicated enough. She's like, I like that, and he's like, easy? And she's like, yeah, I mean, not in a kind of slutty type of way, but just kind of like, it's fun. It doesn't have to be something necessarily serious, but also at the same time, it's a comfort to have something that's not so complicated in her extremely complicated life, and it's like, for him, it's like, I don't like lying to Ross, because, he's spent enough time with Ross, and it's like, oh, he's a good kid. Obviously, Ross loves working for Liam, and it's like, he just feels guilty lying to him about their situation. And obviously, Jenny's in this complicated thing of like, yeah, it's been 3 months, I mean, probably more so subsequently, because, I mean, we don't know the time frame. Obviously, we know at the beginning it was a 3 month, since everything went down with David. But the fact of the matter is, like, that's still never going to be the easiest thing. Like, because, I mean, truth be told, this was always going to be an awkward conversation, a year or two down the road. It was always going to be a thing of like, you know, when are you, because that's always the thing, when are you allowed to move on? My personal take on it, I get everyone's, you know, Ross has got his situation. He has every right to feel the way he feels. Because people will look at it a certain way, like, oh, your husband died like only a couple months ago and you're already, you know, but it's like, who are you to tell someone when they're ready to move on? When they, you know, because everyone deals with grief in their own way. She needs someone. So that's why I'm like, once again, I can understand why Ross feels the way he does, but at the same time, I would never demonize Jenny for like, oh, it's like, no, you went through something traumatic. Plus you learned a whole bunch of stuff about like, oh, my husband gambled away so much of our damn money, put a second mortgage on our house without me even knowing, and gambled that away. It's like leaving us in stupid amounts of debt. It's like, you can understand those complicated feelings of loss, anger, sadness, and rage. Like, you know, you need something to hold on to, something to anchor you down, you know? So that's why she got the new job. She got, you know, so it's interesting because even at the very beginning, like, you know, when we saw the house and everything in the opening credits, I was like, isn't that Jenny's house? I was like, wait, there's a dead body. Oh, okay. Because part of me was one, let's not forget there was a lady who lived there beforehand. So I was like, well, I guess if the body had been in there much longer, there wouldn't be any flesh on it. It'd probably be just a skeleton by this point in time. Because I was wondering, I was like, did the previous tenant, homeowner, did she have something to do with, or had that body been beforehand? Who knows? But regardless, like, I was like, what are the circumstances? Because obviously Liam's trying to fix like the water and stuff like that, and he's like, well, it would take a while for someone to come out here to fix it, but it's like I can adjust the water to come from the well, and I was like, and that's how we're going to find out about the dead body in the well, which Liam keeps referring to as the murder well. She's like, we don't know that it's a murder. Stop calling it a murder well. I mean, because it's an interesting situation, because it's like. And I think this is an interesting aspect of Jenny's life and just how people view it, especially because it's like, well, she has all this family, like she has her family, like obviously her son's there, her dad's there, friend, Sabina, and Allison from work, and now Liam's there, and also your mother-in-law, which that's got to complicate things because you were literally just with Liam kind of making out, and like, oh, your mother-in-law comes in, so... And over the course of the episode, I'm going to go ahead and just jump to this. I wonder, does she know about what David did? I mean, because also it's like, that's your kid, so you're going to be a little more forgiving, but I don't know. Because the thing is, no one threw it in her face, so I don't know if she knows. Her dad knows, but I don't know if David's mom knows about what he did. And because, like I said, no one made a point to bring it up. Because also it's like, who the hell am I trying to, like, who am I to, like, besmirch your image of your son, you know? But it's just like, because, like, Mona goes hard after Jenny because it's like, oh, because she finds out, oh, Ross isn't in school right now. He's not just going to be a carpenter. Because for her, it's like, no, like, you don't like this place. I understand. Be honest. And she was like, I just don't think this is somewhere that David would live. Because she also throws it at Jenny that, like, oh, there's no pictures of David anywhere. And even Ross kind of takes that later on when the whole Liam situation, like, spirals out of control. Because it's like, oh, the other lady he's with, she's like, I know we weren't exclusive, but I was making Thanksgiving dinner. She's smashing up, I guess, his truck and everything. And that led to, like, you know, things coming out in front of Ross, and it's just like, Jesus, it sucks, these circumstances. And it's kind of shitty that he's like, because he's like, are you and my mom? And he's like, you have to talk to your mom about it. It's like, that's shitty of you to immediately throw that on her. It's like, yeah, this is your kid, like, I get, he's like, I'm gonna deal with this situation, you deal with this, but it's like, it's still shitty of him to have done that, because it's kind of been like, no, like, you know, it's not what you think it is, and kind of let her be able to tell it in her own time. Well, I mean, to be fair, it was already there. It was thrown out there. Well, because, you know, Liam kept ignoring, because I kept wondering, like, what's that phone call about? What are you ignoring? And it's like, oh, it turns out because I think for him, it's a thing of, like, he wants things to be exclusive. Because she was like, I know things aren't exclusive between us, but she's like, I went through the trouble of, like, because he canceled, like, last minute. Like, that time he was texting, I guess he was like, yeah, I'm staying at someone else's place, and maybe she geotagged, well, maybe she knew where he lived, and geotagged, and was fine, like, oh, this is where you're at? Oh, you were blah, 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 blah. Maybe, I don't know. It was a sucky situation. Obviously, that was after the fact is the dead body got pulled out the well, and the fact of the matter is, because I've only literally heard of the term saponification, just because I won't say the byproduct, but I get a lot of soap ads on YouTube. So like a particular soap ad over and over again, which I always think is kind of funny. That kind of uses the word saponification. So like that was the first time I'd ever heard that word. So to hear it under these circumstances too, it's like, oh yeah, like the corpse is saponified, and he was like, what? She's like, you know, kind of got like soap, and he's just kind of basically waxy, and it's like even him being like, oh. But I thought it was interesting that immediately you can tell the whole situation was kind of triggering to Liam. He was trying to pretend like, oh, I'm way more okay. But obviously it's like death never sits right with you, especially I think under his circumstances of like he's killed people before. So I'm sure death in itself doesn't sit right with him just in general because of like, you know, he even talks about it. It's because she was like, oh, like how much it would be, you know, too much, you know, seeing a dead body or whatever. Because I think for him, it's probably a complicated thing of like how she handles death. You know, it's like, oh, like, you know, she's just so like casual with it while he isn't, you know. But he talks about it. It's because when he first killed somebody, it took a part of him, you know, and he's been trying his best to get that part of him, like he's trying to get it back, you know? Because I think it takes something out of it. It takes something away from you, like whether it's your soul or something, like some part of you just never comes back after killing someone, and he's trying to get back to that. And obviously, like I said, with the trap situation and everything, like you can tell, like there's still a bit of a struggle there. But also, like, you know, I also love the get the snake as evidence, and the cop is like, no, it's a snake. I'm like, dude, I get it. You should have jumped on that, but at the same time, I'm like, I get it. It's, you know, it's a snake. I wouldn't have done it either. But it's also crazy because it's like your entire family's out there being like, holy shit, Allison's like sick. It's like, you didn't drink out of the water. It's like, then why am I, is it like psychosomatic with like this situation? So being, you know, ends up taking her home. Obviously, you know, Jenny's talking to the victim. They end up finding out his name is James. His daughter named Lisa. Like Jenny ends up calling her, and then like Mona bursts in, like it's like, which is shitty on her because Jenny's trying to have like a very like compassionate conversation because because Lisa's like, oh yeah, like they haven't known what happened to her dad for the past 2 years, and so the fact of the matter is, like they still set a place for him at the Thanksgiving table. It's like you'd still have to come down and identify him, but it's like obviously, you know, Jenny understands what it's like to kind of, you know, obviously lose someone like that. And obviously, because the whole thing, that's why Sabina came over in the first place, was because, like, this is Jenny's first Thanksgiving without David and everything. But Mona, you know, because Mona's the one from the trailer that I talked about that said, like, she has a very unnatural attachment to death, which is so shitty because she's like, first your sister, now David, this job, you know, it's like, oh, you rather, you know, you're not spending time with Ross the way and it's like, for one, it's like, who the hell are you to judge her for that? Because it's like, once again, everyone handles grief in their own way. For her to throw that into Jenny's face like that was so shitty. It's like, it's not just, you know, yes, Ross is young and he's got his complicated, you know, feelings about everything, but it's like, you should never discount her grief. It's like, you got your way of grieving. Like, don't discount like what she's going through, what she's feeling. If she wants to dive herself into work, I feel like that's kind of a very natural response. But it's like, why you left, you know, such a job behind, you know, as a doctor to be this. It's like, because David's death triggered that in her, you know. But it's just kind of like, I guess because Jenny doesn't really talk about it, like, you know. And so, you know, Ross is pissed now. He wants to go stay with his, you know, grandma for a while, which immediately Jenny's dad, it's like, oh, under her regime, like, I guess she's kind of very like probably rules with that iron fist type of situation. So it's kind of like he's not going to be able to last like a week or something. But the way they also make it sound like, it's like, the way Jenny made it sound like, it seems like, I mean, that's always a stereotype, like mother-in-laws are hell. There's been plenty of movies and stories, and just obviously, once again, that's just a general stereotype. But it seems like she's always giving Jenny shit, you know, and it's just kind of like, oh, you saying all that is just another thing. It's like, I always feel bad too, because it's like, I feel like Ross didn't really come to defend her. I was like, should I kind of stuck up for your mom and be like, whoa, grandma, you're completely out of line, like. Once again, it's just like, I don't know, like, obviously you're trying to keep the peace, like, obviously you love your grandma, you love your mom, so you're trying to keep the peace and everything, but it's just still kind of like I don't know, it's just kind of complicated situation. Obviously, her and her dad kind of work it out a little bit, but it's like we end up finding out James didn't, wasn't murdered because everyone else is kind of jumping to the whole thing of like the cop that's there, even Liam. It's like, oh, this seems like murder. She's like, just because this doesn't mean it's necessarily murder, because she was thinking like, oh yeah, maybe like he was near a certain body of water that maybe something happened, he fell in, and then his body drifted and ended up in her well. But because it turns out that's not too far off, because it turns out like the symbol he has on him isn't she thought was a shamrock. It ended up being a cross from like, it's like, oh, like apparently I guess like the chemo or radiation, it's like where to know specifically where to hit it. Doctors draw something there to kind of let them know ahead of time, but it's like the guy James tattooed on him, so like he didn't know, like that's why the sudden life insurance policy for like $1 million. But the problem was he meant to make it look like an accident and not a suicide, but he didn't know that sadly things were going to work out to the way that his daughter would never discover his body, so she was never able to get any of that money anyway. Like it's sad circumstances all around, and but her dad is like, no, they do get something. You got bring them closure. And it's like, obviously her dad tries to make her feel better about everything that Mona said, being like, you've always been very, basically very special, inquisitive, basically. Like, you've asked a lot of questions, so we'll put it at that. But the fact of the matter is, you doing what you do basically helps. It's like, whatever the circumstances that led you to do the job that you're doing, you do help, because you're getting the truth. You're basically able to give people closure, and that's something that shouldn't be kind of scoffed at. That shouldn't be looked, a certain way at. It's like, you were doing good for a lot of people, so to keep that, in mind. And I think that's such an interesting avenue with this whole thing. I also thought it was super messed up. That's some dark shit. When he made a dementia joke, because he's like, whose house it is? He's like, oh, I'm sorry, just a little dementia joke. I was like, Jesus, dude. I mean, to be fair, his circumstances, seems like it's along those lines, because he felt like, he was like, oh yeah, this nature, this air, I feel clear-minded, so it seems like it is kind of it does seem like it is that type of situation. So it's like, people cope, by making like, it's a defense mechanism, I'm sure, kind of, but it's also because he knew how stressed out Ginny was and he was trying to make her feel better. But it's just like, it's just so much. It's just like, because I was like wondering if this was going to turn into a murder case, but it turned out not to be. But it's just like everything that could go wrong went wrong under these circumstances. It's just like every little thing came together to just implode in this Thanksgiving. It's like, this is probably the shittiest Thanksgiving, So there's that. Then there's the circumstances around, she looks at that picture of the dog, because now she didn't even correlate it. She's like, wait, this dog? It's like, oh yeah, that was your dog. Like your sister, it kind of left. It couldn't stand, it was grief stricken, so it couldn't be around when your sister died, it couldn't be around anymore. And then obviously Ginny starts having a panic attack and she loses her pill. And then when she's panicking though, it revives a memory. It seems like she got attacked by the dog because her feet are covered in blood. She's got like a wound on her side. Maybe the dog attacked or whatever. But her dad took the dog out and shot it. Her dad literally just made it seem like the dog ran away or something. So it's like, why would he lie? I mean, to be fair, he's older, so maybe his mind, maybe he's remembering things wrong, or he specifically lied because like she was a little girl, so maybe she is like, well, you don't remember, so I'm not going to be the one to bring it up. But it's like, the fact is that you lie. So it might be a situation where she's like, maybe there's more going on here. Maybe that's what the dog's supposed to represent. Because it seems like, it's kind of pointing out the fact is that she's been through a lot of traumatic stuff. Her sister, David, probably some stuff from her upbringing. So maybe that's kind of part of it too. Like, once again, the dog represents something her subconscious is trying to tell her that maybe she's not realizing or not remembering. Maybe David's death triggers, because it seems like that's at the very least in the context of the show, it seems like that's the first time she's ever saw the dog. So maybe David, maybe that dog's death was like, well, it's connected to her sister's death. So it's like, because we still don't know what the circumstances were around her sister's death. So like, those might have been her first earlier experiences with death. We don't know what the situation is like with her mom and everything. But it's like, at least while she was a little, who knows? I think that's all, like, I don't know if that's going to turn into an overarching thing. I probably think it will, just because it seems like it's so connected to Ginny. But then also she gets a call, like, it turns out, like, oh, some of those pig bones, well, at least one of them isn't a pig bone. It's a human bone. It's like, all right, so we've got one bone to an entire missing body. So, okay, let's figure that out. At the same time, Donovan's working with this woman, Greer, because obviously we still don't 100% know what her, because she talks about the fact of the matter is that she basically keeps tabs on, like, the homeless population in this, because they're a particular group that not only the government but police ignore, because the government doesn't take, like, the government only cares about, like, oh, like, here are people's residents and stuff like that during elections and stuff like that where people are. The homeless population are a group of people that just kind of gets thrown to the wayside. They don't really get any of the benefits of, like, you know, part of a census or anything like that because they don't have a home and stuff, like a fixed address is kind of how she put it. And obviously the police kind of don't really pay as much attention, you know, sadly. And so this has to deal with, like, the case, one of the cases that Jenny reopened, that's getting reopened because of Jenny. And it's this dude named Gerald, and it turns out he stabbed, like, a homeless, he's like, oh, this dude's claim was always, like, a homeless man was attacking him, so he stabbed him 27 times with a pair of scissors. And it's like, obviously Greer is like, obviously she doesn't believe that. It's like, you don't, you know, I always was told not to run around with scissors. So the fact of the matter is, she's helping McAvoy figure out this whole situation, because it's like he wants to prevent Gerald from getting out of prison, because obviously his case is going to be, you know, at least his lawyer, because his lawyer made it clear too. She's like, I don't give a damn about the truth. I'm just doing what's best for my client. My client wants to get out. I'm going to get my client out, especially with you. So, like, once again, it's the downside of, like, yeah, there probably are going to be cases where Jenny is like, oh yeah, because of what I did, we can get to the truth, and that's a good thing. Some convictions might be overturned. Some people might be set free. We can find the real bad person involved. And in other situations, there's going to be the situation of, you've opened up a can of worms, you've opened up the dam, and now water's going to come flooding in because there's going to be a lot of bad people getting out because of it. It seems like Gerald's one of those people, but it seems like Greer was able to figure out, like, oh, there are other homeless people that were murdered, but, like, obviously they kind of got swept under the rug, and it's like, because Gerald is a rich douchebag that just kind of felt superior and felt like, oh, I can get away with doing whatever. So it's like, it's not just this one murder, there are other murders, but Donovan's like, it's circumstantial. Like, there's no clear evidence. He's like, I could barely get Gerald on this one murder. How am I going to figure out the others? And obviously Greer's kind of like, well, this is what you brought me in for. It's because obviously for her, it's like, this is a man that murdered other people, other homeless people, and just, it's almost like you're not going to get justice for them. So it's like, obviously it's like, it's going to be up to him to kind of find any evidence. I thought that was going to be him calling at the end of the episode, it being connected to Jenny, him going like, all right, if I might be mad at Jenny, but because at the very least, this is a good thing. Like, her reopening in this case allowed you to find out, oh, there's actually other murders that he might be tied to. So you might be able to get him on those other murders, and, you know, might be able to kind of get justice for those people who don't know. It's like, oh, maybe, you know, maybe these homeless people had family that, you know, never found out whatever happened to, you know, so at least, and even if it isn't closure for them, at least closure for the victims to be like, the person, you know, for whatever it's worth, the person that killed you is locked up, you know, so, because once again, you know, that was Jenny's thing, like, she brought up to Donovan, was it last episode, or what she said? She said, it's her way of telling the dead, I see you, you know, so, but I think the fact is Donovan didn't immediately rush to Jenny's help with this, like, oh, maybe you can help me find some evidence that wasn't there that maybe Peterson overlooked, especially if these other cases get kind of pointed your way, you know, we'll see kind of how things kind of play out, whether this has anything to do with that bone that was found in amongst those pig bones, maybe not. Like I said, the whole complicated thing that Jenny's going through with Ross right now. Also, like, where things stand between her and Liam, because I'm sure this puts a wrench in it big time. So I'm really curious to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.